Thank you very much for returning at pace and finding your seat. We have done our very best to caffeinate you over the last 25 minutes, but we can give you the fullest of assurances that you will be, in any case, very stimulated by the presentations of the three people that we now have on stage. And I think, as you know, the IISS Manama Dialogue is seeking to be a truly trans-regional forum for defense diplomacy. When we began in 2004, the effort was principally focused on the 6 countries of the GCC, Iraq, Jordan, Egypt, 1 or 2 Europeans, and 1 or 2 North American countries represented. But the stakeholders in Gulf security and the extroversion of the Gulf states and their own interests in other neighboring regions means that the added value that the IISS Manama Dialogue could bring to defense diplomacy depended on ensuring the widest diversity of participation without losing sight of the central purpose of our reunion each year, which is to understand the different sources of regional security and defense and the different ways in which allies, partners, and friends could contribute to that. And that is why you have, in a sense, 3 different regions represented at this 3rd plenary session on the very central theme of maritime security in the Middle East. It's evident that powers in the Indo-Pacific have themselves in their own region a very determined interest in freedom of navigation. The phrase of the moment is also a free and open Indo-Pacific, and there has been a lot of consultations in the Indo-Pacific about how to ensure maritime security and freedom of navigation, and also on the specific issue of piracy, where some years ago in the Malacca Straits this was a growing phenomenon, but owing to the increased intelligence sharing in the region and the ability to act jointly and in a coordinated way, even as between countries that were not formal allies, those incidences of piracy have reduced. In this region, of course, it's been very much the security of freedom of navigation through the Straits of Hormuz that has been of current immediate concern, and the variety of different countries that have sought in their own ways to secure freedom of navigation through the Straits of Hormuz is the issue of the moment, but I know that our panelists will go beyond the issues of the moment to be able to develop principles of best practice to develop over the coming years. That is why we have speaking this morning the Defense Minister of Japan, Kono Taro, who has been twice before to the Manama Dialogue in his capacity as Foreign Affairs Minister. We're delighted to receive him again now as Minister for Defense of Japan. It's a real pleasure to have with us General Mackenzie, the commander of U.S. Central Command. For those of you who don't know the particularities of the U.S. command structure, the U.S. Central Command covers an enormous geography and an extraordinary range of countries, which imposes considerable pressures of defense diplomacy on the holder of that office. And so it's a real pleasure to have General Mackenzie making a pit stop here at the Manama Dialogue on what I know is a very charged schedule to address this very important subject. And it's a delight to have with us Abdul Hadi Abdi, the Minister of State for Foreign Affairs of Somalia. I referred at the start to the challenge that the states, particularly of Southeast Asia, had earlier in combating the questions of piracy. And for Somalia, maritime security is not so much linked perhaps with freedom of navigation, but with the constraints that need to be imposed on the illicit use of maritime waters and the land bases from which they deploy that can affect the security of the East African region from which he hails. So now, delighted to see that the room is full and attentive. Could I please invite the Minister for Defense of Japan, Kono Taro, to address this third plenary session. Thank you, sir.
Dr. Chipman, honorable ministers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I am Kono Taro. I am honored and grateful to be back here in Manama to talk with you today in my new capacity as Defense Minister of Japan. I moved from Foreign Affairs Ministry to Defense this September, and I got a much bigger budget, but I got a much bigger headache as well. As I noted in my last two remarks delivered at this forum past 2 years, I firmly believe that the peace and stability of the Middle East region is directly linked to the peace and economic prosperity of the world, including that of Japan. And there is a unique role that Japan can play to contribute to this region. This has been my conviction as I navigated Japan's diplomacy as the foreign minister for 707 days. Now as defense minister, it remains to be my compass in guiding the direction of Japan's security-based engagement in this region. The Middle East is a hub for global commerce and trade. This region is the world's largest producer and exporter of oil. And in this region, a significant maritime choke point that are critically important, namely the Suez Canal, Strait of Hormuz, and Bab el-Mandeb Strait. It goes without saying that international peace and prosperity depend on the maritime security of this region. 99.6% of Japan's international trade is delivered by maritime transportation. Reliance on maritime transportation of the Middle East is particularly notable when it comes to oil import. As such, it's no exaggeration to state that Japan enjoys stable economic activity over 8,000 kilometers away from Manama, precisely because of the security of the Middle East region. The challenges to maritime security in the Middle East have provided an opportunity for economically developed Japan to meet its responsibilities within the international community. For Japan, a stable supply of oil from the Middle East was one of the crucial elements that led to our rapid economic growth after the World War II. And it remains to this day the foundation of our continued prosperity through international trade. We are acutely aware of the utmost importance of maintaining a stable maritime security in the Middle East that will continue to foster global economic growth and prosperity. In 1991, Japan sent 6 vessels of its maritime self-defense force to the Gulf to conduct minesweeping operations alongside the naval forces of other countries. This operation was named Operation Gulf Dawn in anticipation of a new dawn of hope for the region after the Gulf War. This engagement was Japan's very first overseas deployment since the establishment of the Japan Self-Defense Force in 1954. Under this operation, Japan's contingent dismantled a total of 34 mines without an incident. It made a significant contribution to the safety and security of this vital, important maritime location. The success of Operation Gulf Dawn brought about a change in the mindset of the Japanese people as to our responsibilities. It awakened the spirit of international cooperation that inspires nations to act in support of the international community and not in pursuit of self-interest. Since then, Japan's Self-Defense Force has continued to contribute to regional maritime security. Japan provided a decade of assistance to maritime interdiction operations against terrorism and the weapons transportation in the Indian Ocean. Japanese commanders and liaison officers have been on duty in CTF 151 headquarters here in Bahrain. Japan also has taken part in the ongoing counter-piracy operation off the coast of Somalia and in the Gulf of Aden for over a decade now. At this very moment, 2 Japanese patrol aircraft and a destroyer are on duty as part of the counter-piracy operation in the Gulf of Aden. Relatedly, Japan's Self-Defense Force is forging broader and closer ties with this region through exercises such as International Maritime Exercise from 2012, Defense Equipment Cooperation, person-to-person links between junior commissioned officers, and other initiatives as well. I trust the foregoing examples of Japan's commitment to the Gulf and Indian Ocean demonstrate our intent and capability to remain committed to the maritime security and peace and stability of the Middle East. After all, the deployment of our defense assets and personnel to this region over the past 2 decades in particular has come at a time of increasing concern about the security in Japan's immediate vicinity. In other words, we recognize the ongoing importance of maritime security here in the Middle East, even in view of passing security challenges closer to home. Japan has contributed to the maintenance of maritime security in the Middle East as we take the view that an open and secure maritime order provides the basis for a stable and prosperous international community. There may have been changes in maritime affairs over many centuries, but a freedom of navigation has always been and should remain a fundamental and universal principle. In order to ensure safe overflight, maritime passage, and other activities permitted under international law, adherence to the rule of law at the sea is essential. With respect to the rule of law in the maritime context, I refer to Prime Minister Abe's 2014 Shangri-La Dialogue speech, in which he laid out the 3 principles of the rule of law at sea. These 3 principles are that states shall make and clarify their claims based on international law. States shall not use forces or coercion in trying to derive their claims, and states shall seek to settle disputes by peaceful means. With respect to the Middle East, it is critical that regional waterways and the maritime commons remain a global public good, so as to ensure security and prosperity across the international community. My final point today is to highlight how the foregoing is shaping Japan's engagement with the region in response to evolving security challenges. There have been incidents that cannot be overlooked when considering the maritime security of the Middle East. Japan is concerned about escalation of tension in the region. Japan has persistently made diplomatic efforts to help ease tension and to bring stability to the Middle East. Prime Minister Abe and I, as a foreign minister, visited Iran in June this year, met President Rouhani and Supreme Leader Khamenei. Japan will endeavor to make further diplomatic efforts. Moreover, in an effort to reinforce our information gathering capabilities, Japan has started to consider how we can best utilize the asset of Japan's self-defense force as our independent effort. Our aim is to contribute not only to ensure the safety of Japan-related ships, but also to secure the peace and stability of the Middle East region. In conclusion, I'd like to refer to Japan's vision for a free and open Indo-Pacific. This vision is our guiding principles for international cooperation. In pursuing this vision, Japan will continue to strive for the security of the Indo-Pacific maritime order and broader international order based on the rule of law. It is my conviction that this vision will lead to an improvement in the security of this region and also to international peace and stability. Thank you very much.
Konoto, thank you very much for those remarks and for your important reminder that it was as early as 1991 that the Japanese self-defense forces deployed to this region in order to provide an international public good related to the security of the area. And in this part of the world, there continues to be, I think, great interest in how Japan, through the variety of instruments at its national disposal, can help contribute to international peace and security. And that's why we're also grateful that you have made the effort to be with us again for a third time. Could I now invite General Frank McKenzie, the CENTCOM commander, to address us on maritime security in the Middle East.
Dr. Chipman, thanks for inviting me to speak on this panel. I'm humbled to be in the company of Minister Kono and Minister Abdi as we discuss an issue of global importance, an impact not just for our nations, but for all nations, maritime security in the Middle East. I'd like to use my time here today to briefly address the U.S. military posture in the Middle East and the possibilities that lie ahead with regards to cooperation and collaboration between allies and partners. The Middle East remains of vital national interest to the United States. The various waterways, including the strategic maritime choke points of the Suez Canal, the Bab el-Mandeb, and the Strait of Hormuz are major transit routes for energy and trade. And the ability for commerce to travel these paths freely it's vital, not just for the United States, but for the global economy. Since attacks on shipping in the Gulf began in May, insurance rates for oil tankers have increased by a factor of 10. These costs are passed along the entire value chain, so threats to safe transit in these waterways affects all nations, regardless of how much or little they import energy and regardless of where the threats emanate. Our economies are globally connected. That's an undeniable fact. Ensuring freedom of navigation, especially in these vital areas of the maritime domain, is not only a necessity, but a global responsibility. The United States military proudly accepts its role, its share of the task, if you will, in this activity. And to be clear, we're uniquely suited and resourced to participate in many of these efforts with allies and partners around the world. But it's also a great big world and there's a lot of water to cover. Simply put, we don't have sufficient resources to be where we want to be in the right numbers all the time. Not too many years ago, we maintained a near constant presence with an aircraft carrier battle group in close proximity to the Gulf in these key maritime choke points that I've identified. Today, we have positioned strategic assets globally to provide capabilities and deterrence against multiple adversaries and threats. Although I will note that even as I speak to you today, about 120 miles northeast of here, the carrier strike group centered around the Abraham Lincoln is operating in the Arabian Gulf. As the U.S. adjusts its posture to meet its global and my regional missions, an important element for us to consider is how we work with our partners to create flexible, scalable, sustainable approaches towards securing freedom of navigation. The combined Maritime Forces Multinational Naval Partnership, currently with 33 participating countries, provides an instructive example. Various CMF task forces have operated since 2001, successfully fighting terrorism, preventing piracy, encouraging regional cooperation, and promoting a safe maritime environment. Membership and contributions by participants are flexible, and while the U.S. provides working facilities here in Bahrain, the day-to-day command of the task force rotates among member nations. As we sit here today, the United Kingdom, Kuwait, and Jordan are leading combined task forces 150, 151, and 152, respectively. Another, albeit nascent in comparison, in progress example of this approach to cooperative sea power is the International Maritime Security Construct. We've put this together with member nations Albania, Australia, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and the UK. Working along with these international partners, we're helping to maintain freedom of navigation in and around the Straits of Hormuz by our presence, deterring malign actions and lending attribution to those that do take place, regardless of the origin of the threat. And that's an important point to consider in this forum. Efforts like these are about supporting customary international law and the right of international innocent passage. They're not a preamble to conflict with any particular entity or nation. Some may disagree with me on this point, insisting that the IMSC is all about Iran, and I would tell them simply that they are wrong. Instead, it's about maintaining the freedom of navigation. Yes, Iran has been hindering freedom of navigation in and around the Straits of Hormuz over the past few months. Merchant ships from several countries have been attacked or confiscated by Iran's military forces. Had Iran not undertaken those actions, had there been no threat to freedom of navigation, there might not have been a need for the IMSC. But since it's been operational, none of these actions have occurred. And that's an important fact worth considering. Has the IMSC flooded the Gulf with U.S. and partner naval vessels acting in a provocative manner? I don't believe so. In fact, I think actually the biggest key to the relative success of the IMSC partnership hasn't been the presence of armed naval vessels in the area, but instead the constant stare of reconnaissance assets. The importance of attribution is worth mentioning in this context. The Iranian regime has conducted many non-attributable attacks in the past when they didn't think anyone was looking. They prefer the darkness where their activities can be hidden. They don't do so well in the spotlight or daylight of full exposure and accountability. But the value of having additional reconnaissance resources, things that can shine a spotlight on nefarious activities for all the world to see, is almost certainly having an effect. And a quick thought on deterrence. It's not a military concept, it's a diplomatic and a political construct, and it obtains from the effect that demonstrated capabilities and will have on the mind of a potential opponent or a potential adversary. But whether it's Iran or some other nation, knowing that there is an international will to form these kinds of partnerships and the capabilities to document and expose those who violate international law, that does weigh in on the deterrence calculus. I want to conclude my remarks on the point about being good partners and neighbors. Today we're talking about maritime security in the Middle East, and in the recent months, Iran has been the primary threat to that security. Now, I fully understand that our partners in the region can't choose their neighbors. Saudi Arabia, Iraq, the UAE, Oman, Bahrain, and others. For those nations, Iran is their neighbor, like it or not. And unfortunately, sometimes the Iranian regime has proved itself to be the bully in the neighborhood. And the only way to stand up to a bully is to do it together. As we and our partners in the region continue to work to provide security and stability, we must do so with the knowledge that we are stronger together. We must remember that our strategic strength rests mainly on the partnerships, the alliances, and the whole of government efforts that we bring to bear together. Resources will always be at a premium. Just as the United States has to posture its military globally, we in CENTCOM are working with our partners to develop regional approaches. We do this together, and we do this with the full knowledge and appreciation that each country, each nation, has its own challenges with economic and social reforms. We need to look at defense from a regional perspective and bear those factors in mind. Last month, I participated in a conference in Saudi Arabia that involved the chiefs of defense or their representatives from 18 nations from across the region in Europe. We discussed integrated air and missile defense, securing freedom of navigation, and other aspects of mutual cooperation, looking at how we could position assets across the region to provide the best defensive capabilities. It was a small step, but a good first step, made in good faith and with the best of intentions. I'll close with this. This is a tense and difficult time in the region. The best way to prepare for the difficult days ahead is to realize that we are stronger when we are together. Thank you very much.
General Mackenzie, thank you very much for those remarks, and in particular the excellent clarification you provided on the exact mission of the IMSC to protect innocent passage, defend customary international law, and also its role in lending attribution from wherever it comes to activities that interrupt free passage in the Straits of Hormuz. You give me also an opportunity by your mention of ISR to quote one brief passage from the dossier we released 1 week ago on ISR in the Gulf. So permit me this brief advertisement, but we noted that the maritime ISR challenge in the Gulf is further complicated by the potential of competing maritime security demands of other areas across the region. The regional maritime challenges may oscillate between the Strait of Hormuz, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and the southern Red Sea, or even arise in all three simultaneously, adding to the difficulties in allocating maritime ISR and other maritime security assets. Iran's support of its regional partner forces by the maritime route is another factor to be considered in terms of ISR needs. So I recommend this for reading. And with that, I pass on the floor floor to someone who does have to consider maritime security in another one of these regions, please thank us in having Abdul Khadir Abdi, the Minister of State for Foreign Affairs of Somalia, take the floor. Thank you very much, sir.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank the IISS and Manama Dialogue organizers and the government of Bahrain for inviting us and hosting us in this forum. Regional security and maritime security are in the center of the region of this region's geopolitics. I'm tasked here to show the importance of the maritime security in the world, and in particular in the Middle East and the Horn of Africa. These waters of this region are single-handedly hold the key for a world economy and a flow of goods with the security and the corridors of the Bab el-Mandeb and the Suez Canal. It is heartwarming when this gathering focuses the maritime security of this region. I'm also encouraged to focus the solutions instead of the problems. We know the history of this region, and the challenges are real and tremendous. One challenge that we have faced was piracy. 10 years ago, we were in the height of piracy problem in the waters of the Horn of Africa and the Gulf of Aden. Ships were being hijacked, ransoms were being paid, insurance premiums skyrocketed, and free movement of goods were threatened. Today, I'm very happy to report that piracy have been contained according to the Global Threat Assessment and our National Maritime Threat Assessment. The world have stood up and acted to crush this threat. Today, we have a global naval force based in Djibouti. We also have many military bases in Djibouti. However, the focus now shifts to the threat of terror. The two countries that hold the key for security in the region are Somalia and Yemen. I think we're all aware how crucial the terror we face is in the region. How crucial is the terror that we face in the region. When countries lose control in the institutional governance, anarchy replaces it. The good example is Somalia. Since 1991, the civil war have challenged the whole region. Countries in the region did not act quickly to help stabilize the situation until it was too late. Today, the same thing is happening in Yemen. This time, the regional governments are involved. However, it is very sad to say we have not learned any lessons from the Somali problem. Yemen crisis are still in the early stage, and the solution is easier today than it will be a year from now. Once the war goes on and most of the people flee from the death and destruction, then we allow terror and terror organizations to take hold and establish a breeding ground. We have the terrorist group called Al-Shabaab in Somalia, who are an affiliate from Al-Qaeda. We also have some small contingents of ISIS. The greatest threat of maritime security, since we're focusing on that in the region, today is the Yemen crisis. And we have seen in the recent events what happened. This cannot continue. Many speakers have talked about the population in the region. It is true, 70 to 75% of the population are young people, and that is a challenge, and at the same time, it's a potential. For example, in Somalia, young people today seek employment, education, fruitful future. If we cannot provide that, then we give them the key to terrorists to recruit them. Today, the Horn of Africa is going through a positive change. Somalia is coming back from the ashes. We have an effective government that is undertaking a lot of reform, training the military, registering the existing army, economic reform, and good governance are the key to success. Eritrea and Ethiopia are in a peace. We are also working on solving the Eritrea-Djibouti border dispute. Sudan is a good example for reform, and South Sudan is also being addressed by the regional organization of IGAD. However, Yemen crisis still poses a great threat. We welcome the recent agreement between the government and the separatists, but the Houthi-led war still looms. I would conclude that we need to have a vision of leaving a long-lasting legacy for the region. We must not allow piracy to flourish again by investing and empowering the capacity building of the coastal communities of the region so they will not take the law into their own hands. We need to confront terror by working on stabilizing and good governance. We must end anarchy and provide opportunity for the young people and transparency. Thank you.
Minister, thank you very much for those excellent and very sharp remarks, and for the reminder that Yemen and Somalia are such crucial stakeholders in maritime security in the region. We move now to the dialogue, and I have 7 or 8 people on my list. I'd invite a number of them to speak and then return back to the panel. I promised that those who I'd not been able to include in previous sessions, I would give priority to in this. So let me invite first Amr Musa from Egypt, former Secretary General of the Arab League. Amr.
Thank you, John. I wish to start by thanking Al-Bahrain and the IISS for this very useful exercise, opening a dialogue about the future of this region and also the general future of stability in the world. I was really pleased to listen to this argument about the nexus between good governance and security. And I hope that this issue will be stressed in the conclusions of this session of the Manama dialogue. The second point has to do with the general look to the future of this region, a new regional order. The Minister of Defense of France this morning stressed the notion that a vision of future regional order has to go beyond security. So we have to talk about economics, we have to talk about other issues that promote cooperation between the members of the same community. But here I have 2 points to raise very briefly. When we talk about regional security, I believe, strongly believe, and many others do the same, that the time has come for us to deal with security not only as a reaction to terrorism, but as the building up of security in this region, including, in particular, reviving the issue of a region free from weapons of mass destruction, free from nuclear weapons, free from the ballistic missiles. The issue of regional security has to do with this free zone. The second point here...
Briefly, Amr.
Yes, all right. The second point here is about the notion of moderate countries. What is the definition of a country that is moderate or not moderate? So we have to have a serious discussion about those definitions. countries, all countries in the region, have a great interest in stability, in security, and in discussing the future of this region.
Amna, thank you very much. I'll have to close it with that because we wish to bring in at least 6 or 7 others, but
That's
thank you
enough
for
of
that,
that.
and I will
Thank
make certain that we will have some of those thoughts reflected in our conclusions on Sunday. But from Lebanon, could I invite Maroun Hitti, please?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. My question is for General McKenzie. Sir, as a retired general in the Lebanese Armed Forces, I've been among the persons who promoted the most the partnership between the Lebanese Armed Forces and the United States forces. After this small introduction, it is evident that the situation in Lebanon today shall not return to the statu quo ante, before the 17th of October. And we all know that at the bottom of this boiling soup pan, there is at stake the change of direction of Lebanon towards a neutral status, if not an openly or an open redirection toward the modern Arab world and the West in general, for 2 reasons, one of them being cultural. I believe that the Lebanese, in their culture and in their way of life, are much closer to the modern Arab world and to the West in general than they are to the Iran of the Mullah. So in that ambience, where today all tensions are raising in Lebanon, social, generation conflicts. The left is standing between 2 factions in Lebanon and trying to play a very difficult role. What if at one moment a conflict, a violent conflict, opposes the left to Hezbollah? Knowing that planning for such a reaction from the left against any action from Hezbollah could serve as a deterrent, and we have been advocating the left to do so in the last 6 months before the recent eruption, because we saw it coming. So if the left come to blows with Hezbollah, in the absence of any internal political umbrella, and knowing the strong interaction that exists between the U.S. political decision makers and yourself and your command, what would be the U.S. reaction?
Thank you very much. That's a really powerful question and an important one that we'll want to hear the panel's views on. I know the next question will be on maritime security because it's from our senior fellow for maritime affairs of the IISS, Nicholas Childs.
Thank you, John. I think my question is most specifically aimed at Minister Kono and General McKenzie. We've heard, particularly in this panel, but also through the morning, about the global stakes in maritime security in the region. But we've also heard about the different approaches to dealing with the recent threats, and some virtue has been made of the different approaches, the new frameworks, but also the independent actions. But I pose the question as to whether, particularly the reluctance of the United States, some of their traditional allies, to join the new international maritime security construct, the different rules of engagements that are therefore out there, and in some cases no rules of engagements as far as some of the looser frameworks that are being put together are concerned, that these are in a way hindering that re-establishment of deterrence that you, General McKenzie, particularly talked about. And I wonder if you could address whether there is more to be done in terms of aligning those approaches, and particularly to Minister Kono, given, as you pointed out, the traditional approach of international engagement that Japan has played in this region, in CMF, in IMX. Did you and Prime Minister Abe consider joining the IMSC? And if so, what has made you, in this case, decide not to take that approach? Thank you.
And as for the next question, I'm sure it will somehow touch on the relationship between governance and security and be of interest to our Somali guest, Virginia Comely from the IISS.
Thank you, John. Good guess. My question is indeed for His Excellency, the Foreign Minister of Somalia. So a number of countries from the Gulf region and the broader Middle East have a presence and indeed multiple interests in East Africa. And oftentimes those interests are at odds with each other. And so we've seen how some rivalries among those countries have actually been playing out in African countries. So I was wondering what Somalia is doing in order to minimize the detrimental effects of those rivalries for the country. Thank you.
Thank you. And from Australia, Jacinta Carroll.
Thank you very much, everyone, for excellent presentations. My question will go to how we can better explain the importance of maritime security, being a matter that's remote to most people, including most policymakers, and also whether we've got the narrative right. Specifically with General Mackenzie's presentation, so you spoke about explaining the true focus of the IMSC, but already at this dialogue we've heard different characterisations of that initiative. From some commentators even describing it as very much a US approach, a distinctive approach, some even calling it an aggressive approach. And here I reflect upon Sir Mark Sidwell's comments about implausible deniability, because in the maritime environment we're seeing a range of actors, sometimes showing that it's themselves in this environment, other times acting through proxies. Closer to where I live, we have disputes about the South China Sea involving freedom of navigation and state-sponsored illegal fishing in the Southern Oceans and the Southwest Pacific. So are we getting the narrative of maritime security right? Are we explaining its importance? And are we explaining how these operations work? If not, how do we get the right story out? Thank you.
Thank you. And from France, Rim Martet.
Thank you. General Mackenzie, you spoke of the importance of deterrence. Has the U.S. Weakened deterrence in the region by not responding to Iran shooting down a U.S. UAV or attacking the Saudi oil facilities? How do you regain escalation dominance from Iran right now? And the French defense minister said France and others have not joined the IMC because it's part of the U.S. maximum pressure policy. How can we be stronger together, as you said it twice, if even among such close allies you can't mount a maritime security mission together?
And from the UAE, Fatima Saeed.
Yes, thank you, Mr. John. My question is for Japan, Minister of Defense. After the recent events in the region, I mean the attacks on the ships and violating the freedom of maritime navigation, as you mentioned, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe visited Iran as an action of diplomacy and soft power. However, now Japan will start to deploy its forces in the region. So my question is, does that mean it's a recognition from Japan, maybe it's the time to start utilizing hard power?
Thank you very much. And from Japan, Tadashi Maeda, the governor of JBIC.
Thank you, John. I'd like to start with a special thanks to Minister Kono that you are trying, that's very much strong commitment of Japanese government to peace and stability of the region. My question is that some clarification that the Chief Cabinet Secretary's press conference on October 18th about peace and stability of the Middle East. One is that Japan will make the independent activities rather than joining at the US-led initiative, which you referred to briefly. But secondly, that the possibilities of using the new asset or deploying a new maritime defense forces, and also switching that using existing the maritime defense forces deployed in the region of the four mainly for the counter-piracy mission. We switched to the new mission. And also, finally, sometimes Japanese language is very ambiguous. The Chief Counsel said that the purpose of the new initiative is to strengthen information gathering, the capability. But it exactly means that ISR. This is my simple question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mark Fitzpatrick.
Thank you, John. Question to Minister Konotaro, following up on two other ones. When Japan declined to participate in the U.S.-led maritime security initiative in the Strait of Hormuz, I presume that it partly was because it did not want to interfere with Prime Minister Abe's effort to mediate between Iran and the United States, an effort that so far has not worked. Is Japan still seeking to mediate with Iran, and if so, in what ways, please?
Thank you, and I'll take two more. Vijat Ishakpadi from Thailand.
Thank you very much. I'd also like to direct my question to Minister Taro, in his remarks he talked about the importance of maritime security in the Middle East to Japan. But also in our part of the world, in Northeast Asia and Southeast Asia, we are also exposed to various maritime conflicts stemming from non-traditional factors and geopolitical routes. So we've tried to create a trusted and confident maritime environment where conflicts can be prevented. We've tried to put our efforts into arranging various regional mechanisms such as the ASEAN Regional Forum, the expanded ASEAN Maritime Forum, the ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting Plus, which is not only between ASEAN but with our dialogue partners. So I was just wondering whether from your participation in these forums, whether you see any use for it, what use you see from it, and whether it can be replicated or useful for this part of the world also. Thank you.
And I'll have two very quick ones. Etzman Al-Khatbi from the UAE.
Thank you, John. Allow me, I will speak in Arabic, and my question to General Mackenzie. General Mackenzie.
General Mackenzie, you said that the Iranian attacks stopped after the American intervention. As a person coming from this area, I would like to tell you that we feel disappointed after the attacks on Aramco because there is no more trust that America is an ally that is supporting its allies. Even your presence now in the area. So till when will these carriers, will the U.S. carriers will remain in the area? What is the guarantee after having, for example, a deal with Iran later on that the region will not have any more this imbalance that we are living now? So this logic that we are having in the international relations that sanctions against Iran are not to, make the deal better for the Gulf states. No, to make it better for the U.S. vis-à-vis China. Because the loser out of this deal was the U.S. and the winner was China. So my direct question is as follows. Why didn't the U.S. give the KSA the information that were gathered by the satellites regarding the drones and the missiles that attacked the KSA?
Question from Noura Hamid Alamea, Bahrain. Noura.
Thank you, Chair Chipman. Thank you for letting me come in again. It's quite difficult to follow such a powerful speaker just before me and a powerful question, but I'll give it a try. Climate change has been recognized as a major issue for coastal populations with potential socioeconomic, environmental, and health impacts at all scales and has had considerable attention by the scientists and community alike. However, it remains to be seen if existing knowledge on the interplay between climate change and maritime security has been translated into policy, reducing risks to humans and the environment alike. So touching upon the topics of this meeting, there is recent evidence elaborating on the nexus between climate change impacts, social vulnerabilities, and the occurrence of maritime criminality. So we were speaking today on piracy, anarchy, and the essential need for more resources of defense. So at the end of the day, you're in the ocean and ports and the coastline where land meets water. So my question for all our guests today and panelists is, are we addressing the gaps between concerns raised by the academic community and society and what is actually acknowledged in national, regional, and official strategic documents to inform decision makers and stakeholders about the possible dependencies between climate change and maritime security, which could be a crucial step towards improving global ocean governance? Thank you.
Noura, thank you very much again, and we return now to our panel. I know it's a hard task, but I'll give each of them 2 to 2.5 minutes to succinctly answer the variety of questions posed to them, and as has been my practice this morning, I will ask our guests to speak in the reverse order that they originally spoke. So first the Minister of State of Foreign Affairs Somalia, then General Mackenzie, and we'll close with Kono Taro. Minister.
Thank you, Excellency. I agree with my Minister, His Excellency Amr Musa, about the thing that he addressed about good governance and security. Those are things that always in this region that go hand by hand. When you have a good governance, you always have stability, and when you have stability, you have transparency, and you fight corruption, you fight nepotism, you fight all the things that breed extremism. So therefore, it's always crucial to have good governance, and especially in this region. And Ms. Kamali asked about how do we minimize the rivalries of the many armies in the region and people who have presence in the region. It's true. I have mentioned earlier in my speech that we have many military bases in Djibouti, and I think the last account was 6 or 7 bases in Djibouti, and those countries are always here to make sure things go smooth, and the maritime security and the freedom of navigation and everything is good. However, the case of Somalia is kind of different. We have countries who have invested heavily in Somalia, like United States. United States provides military training, provides drone coverage when we're fighting with Al-Shabaab, and provides air support and all the things that we are fighting with. And that's something that is very crucial. It turned the tide when we are confronting the threat of Al-Shabaab. Al-Shabaab is now reduced to just a guerrilla who are hiding or just bringing car bombs in busy civilian areas and things like that. Because of the threat of the military, Al-Shabaab have now been diminished. The Somali military is being trained, and they are taking the war to Al-Shabaab, and they are gaining a lot of grounds. The UK is present in there. They provide training in a region called Baidawa. The Italians are also doing a training. The European Union are paying the salaries of the Amazon peacekeeping troops. So all of these regional and powers are there and to help Somalia stabilize, because many of the people who believe in Somalia see the potential of Somalia, and it's coming back, and how crucial it is for the region. Therefore, we are grateful for their help, and Somalia is not a country that can pick and choose who will be their friends. Somalia is not in a place like that. We are in a place that we need a lot of help. So we will get all the help that we can get from anyone who is genuine and who's doing something good for Somalia. We have regional governments who are neighbors. Right now we're having a dispute with Kenya, a maritime dispute. However, that does not deter us from engaging in Kenya. The president was there about a week and a half ago, and he made a, agreement to reestablish the bilateral relations, and that's something that is going forward. And the last question was addressed by Nora Lamer, and the concerns of the climate change. Climate change is real, and it's going there, and it's affecting the people on the ground. It's true. I mean, right now, as we speak, we were having a drought earlier this year, and today we're having severe floods in Somalia. And the reason this is not something that used to happen in the past, that this is something that happened in the climate change. And therefore, it will affect food shortage, people going, becoming internally displaced IDPs, people looking for, might be going through the desert of Libya to go seek a better life in Europe, and things like that. It will happen. And on the top of that, terrorists are there. They are there to recruit. Who do they recruit? They recruit the young people. The young people, as I mentioned earlier, young people are the center of the crisis in these regions. If we want to address, and I think the panel before that talked about young people is essential. It's a key to have a good future for this region, and I thank you.
Thank you. General McKenzie.
Thank you. I'll begin with just a direct answer to the question on Lebanon from General Heedy. We continue to believe that the Lebanese Armed Forces remain the best security guarantor for the state of Lebanon and should be the expression of the state as the holders of armed power in Lebanon. That continues to be our position, and we'll continue our strong support for the LAF. Let me talk just a little bit about the question on rules of engagement. And for the non-technical members of the audience, ROE, or rules of engagement, basically dictate what you can and cannot do when in contact or when in potential contact. They're legally binding measures. So the question was, are the ROE and the complexity of the situation putting nations off from joining the IMSC? Look, nations may have their own reasons for not joining an act of collective security, so I can't comment on that. But I can tell you that nobody is more comfortable in a complex, multi-ROE environment than navies. And my NAVCENT commander, Admiral Jim Malloy, who's seated down here in front, we work every day in an environment where nations hold different views, different red cards about what they can and cannot do. That's just a complex environment that we're very comfortable with. In fact, at sea is far simpler typically than on land and even in the air. So I do not believe that's actually a reason. There are perhaps other good reasons why you wouldn't want to do it, but rules of engagement should not be one of those reasons. I agree that the narrative is actually very important about the IMSC. I've said a couple of times, others have said, and we will continue to say that the IMSC is not related to the maximum pressure campaign. You can draw your own conclusions about that. I am confident, though, that that's the intent that we've conveyed to the force. It is not designed to be aggressive. It is designed instead to be a reasonable, a balanced approach, and it is inherently multilateral in its design and execution. And that's obvious, I think, if you just look at what's happening, what has happened since its inception, the success we've had, and the way we're going to go forward. The last point I'd just like to make is talk a little bit about deterrence. And of course, I'm largely talking about Iran. But as I sort of alluded to in my opening comments, deterrence is doubt in the mind of an adversary that the object they're pursuing is ultimately going to be worth the potential loss or damage that will be inflicted on them as they pursue that object. Activities we're undertaking now in concert with our partners in the region are all designed to reestablish deterrence with Iran, and we've had some success with that. It's not perfect, but it continues. There was a question about escalation dominance. I would reject the idea that Iran holds escalation dominance. They may control the next step on the escalation ladder, and I wouldn't dispute that point. But I don't, and the next provocative action, that may be within their ability to execute. But I don't believe that even Iran conceives that they own the last step on the escalation ladder. And that's just a point that we should hold. And taking the first step on an escalation ladder is relatively easy. Contemplating where the last step takes you is a little more difficult. And the last point I would just make is I would not confuse restraint, collaboration with partners, and consensus seeking with weakness. Thank you very much.
General Mackenzie, thank you very much. Colonel Taro.
Thank you. Well, we are still continuing our diplomatic effort to ease the tension in this region. The Prime Minister visited Tehran in June, and he met with President Rouhani in September in New York City for UN General Assembly. So we would like to continue our diplomatic effort to the end. Right now, we are asking all the Japanese ships related to Japan to increase security measures, and we are continuing a diplomatic effort, and we are trying to enhance our information gathering activities. Japan has been in support of JCPOA. When we visited Tehran, the Supreme Leader and the President told us developing nuclear weapon is against Islam. So I think we believe if we could perpetuate the JCPOA, that could be one goal. We still need to talk about missile and other issues. The Japan Self-Defense Force need to operate within the restrictions set by our constitution and our legal frameworks. Japan is not moving to use the hard power, though that's not true. And we are currently considering either or diverting our asset used for piracy mission. We have a base for counter-piracy mission in Djibouti. We have a ship and 2 patrol aircraft. We might divert one of those for new mission for information gathering. And we also considering sending a self-defense force ship to this region. So we will make decision whenever, and we will start a new operation. For Asia, yes, there's a threat to free and open maritime order in East China Sea and South China Sea. In East China Sea, there's a Chinese violation of our territorial water. It's been going on constantly. And there's an issue in South China Sea. I've been to ARF Foreign Ministers meeting, and I just came back from Bangkok for ADMM+. Both forums are very useful and important. I think what we need to do is, if anyone is trying to unilaterally change the status quo, international community need to work against those actions and make those to force them to pay some cost for that. And I think those international joint activity is very important. And we are carefully watching the development of Code of Conduct negotiation on South China Sea. Yes, at ADMM+, a lot of defense ministers talked about the climate change. A lot of defense ministers there think climate change could pose threat to national defense, not just about the erosion, but it could lead to a lot of way, and we need to assess what kind of threat it might pose for national defense. Our free and open Indo-Pacific vision include the counter climate change. We would do capacity building for those countries who might need. So I think that.
Defense Minister, thank you very much. And let me assure everybody in the audience that two of the huge themes that were raised in questions, the problems of governance and security and the varying impacts of different types of climate change on security, are part of the 3 to 5 year research plans that the IISS is now investing a tremendous amount of effort on. So we look to all of you in this room who have raised these issues to help contribute to our research in that area. I have two things to say. One, an administrative point, which is that those of you who have had invitations to the dinner tonight, if you are in receipt of an invitation to the dinner tonight, then I must advise you that you need to be ready to board the transport immediately after the last plenary of the day. We will assemble in the foyer immediately outside this ballroom at 5:45 for a 6 p.m. departure to that dinner for those of you who are carrying a physical invitation to it. But happily, you will have a meal before that, all of you. Lunch will start in 3 minutes, but as you stand and go to that lunch, I hope you will thank very much our three fantastic plenary speakers for this morning.